Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and welcome to another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from across ad tech, martech, and media. I'm Emmy Lederman. I'm an analyst at eMarketer, and today my guests will share how LastPass, which is a password management service, built a flexible tech stack to unify its customer data, boost acquisition, and offer tips for evaluating a CDP. So joining me is Tom Rampley. He is the head of data at LastPass, joining us from Colorado. Hi, Tom.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
And we have Dan Morris, who is the global head of marketing solutions and go-to-market at Databricks, joining us from New York. Hi, Dan.
Hey everyone.
And we have Kalyan Tamala, vice president of product marketing at Uniphore, joining us from San Francisco. Hi, Kalyan.
Hello there.
Thank you all for being here. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop it in the chat. You can also use the chat to send in any questions. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can during the live Q&A in the second part of the show. So Tom, Dan, and Kalyan have a great presentation planned for you today. So with that, Kalyan, over to you.
Thank you, Emmy. Hey everyone. Super excited to be here today, and especially grateful to be joined by Tom from LastPass and Dan from Databricks. Thanks to both of you for making the time. We've got a great session ahead. So first thing, we'll kick things off with broader context, why brands are increasingly investing in CDPs and what that means in a world of very fragmented customer data and rising expectations. Then we'll get into the LastPass story, the specific challenges they were tackling, and what led them to invest in a CDP that to a composable approach, and how they partnered with Databricks and Uniphore to make that happen. You'll also see how the stack came together technically, what kind of use cases LastPass was able to launch quickly, and the business impact it's already driving. And finally, we look ahead, what's next for the team, what lessons you might take away as you think about your own journey. With that, let me move to the next slide. Perfect. So I want to take maybe a minute and a half to talk about why brands typically invest in a CDP, right? As marketing and IT teams work to drive a very personalized, efficient, and data-driven engagement, many brands realize that their existing tech stacks aren't exactly built to handle today's complexity. That's where CDPs, again, customer data platforms, come in. At a high level, brands are investing in CDPs to unlock three key outcomes: speed, sophistication, and control. Let's do it from two standpoints, right? From a marketing standpoint, the goal is to simplify these fragmented manual workflows, often spread across multiple tools and systems. CDPs help marketers launch campaigns faster, personalize content that can be used in these campaigns in real time, and gain visibility into the campaign performance, all while reducing the dependence on IT, because that's where the delay comes, right? And for LastPass, this meant turning disjointed martech into a unified engine, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Tom will cover that. But for IT, what is it from their standpoint? The investment is about control and efficiency. CDPs like from Uniphore, and that too with a composable architecture, make it possible to operationalize data already centralized in platforms like Databricks without duplicating or moving it. And this approach reduces risk, streamlines governance because data is all in one place, and avoids costly tool sprawl. Ultimately, in one line, CDPs are the bridge between siloed data and unified customer experience. Enough with the intro, right? But every brand is different. And that's where the LastPass story really stands out. Uh, let's get into the story. Tom, before we dive into the CDP journey, would you please start by giving everyone a quick overview of LastPass, your role there, and what your team focuses on?
Yeah, certainly. So LastPass is one of the leading password management providers in the world. We're really focused on protecting your identity. We actually refer to ourselves internally as a cryptography company more than anything else. We're really an arm of security more generally. We facilitate access for families, for business owners of all sizes. We have a large consumer base all the way up to some of the biggest corporations in the world as customers. Um, we were spun off of GoTo, which some of you might be familiar with if you've been around tech for a while, about 2 years ago, which will actually become somewhat pertinent when I talk about some of the problems we wanted the Uniphore CDP to solve for us. And then as for my role, I'm the head of data and integrations at LastPass. So I manage all of our data engineering and all of our front-end SaaS system integration, so separate from the actual core product within the office of the CIO. So that's a little bit about LastPass and myself.
Awesome. So when you're thinking of a CDP, right, what were some of the key points that you faced, and walk us through your journey of what the situation that you were in before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at LastPass just over a year. And when I first started in June of 2024, the first thing I was asked to do was start evaluating a CDP. Now, I actually at the time did not have a lot of background with CDPs. I really didn't understand what the purpose was. But as I got into it, it was very interesting for me because I have been on both the sales ops, marketing ops, and data side of things over the last 10 years. And I've got a lot of experience with very disjointed workflows, different data that is siloed in different systems. And it's always been a real struggle to bring all those things together. LastPass had recognized that when they hired me, and that was what they wanted us to fix, right? We had Salesforce, we had Marketo, Gainsight, Pendo, our own product. We had all these different silos of data that we were using for pieces of customer outreach and prospect outreach, but they were not unified. And we had very little insight into what was going on from one to the other. The handoffs in customer experience were not clean. So that was one of the main things we wanted the CDP to solve. Related to that, because you did have these disjointed systems, it was very difficult to say who a customer was in one system when they got to the next, and to understand the entirety of that customer journey. And then I think the final portion is really just to be able to personalize a lot of these customer journeys from the very moment that they first hit our website or click on an ad. That was not a capability that we had, and it's one that we very much needed and have been deriving already from Uniphore.
Awesome. That's a fascinating view into the situation that you're in, right? So once you learned about CDP, what did you set out to achieve with the ideal solution like Uniphore, or previously known as ActionIQ? What did you set out to achieve with once you brought in the CDP?
Yeah, so I think the initial use cases that we had with the CDP were really around just audience creation and digital activation. But even beyond that, consolidating all these marketing tools into a single workflow was really, really important. I've come to view the CDP as much as anything else as an orchestration hub for all of your customer touch points. And that was something, again, that we desperately needed, because we did have very little visibility, especially when you started talking about sales versus marketing versus customer experience. Because these were distinct organizations, it was not always easy to understand how they were each approaching the customer. Related to that, improving personalization. If somebody comes into our website as just an individual consumer looking for a password management solution, we want to send them on a very different journey than somebody who comes in as the head of IT for a billion-dollar company, because they're going to have very, very different needs. We can serve both of them, but we're not going to want to show all the full features of our admin console, let's say, to somebody who's just a personal individual user who wants a password management solution. And then finally, everybody spends a lot of money on marketing. It's one of the largest line items on our budget, and being able to make even small optimizations across that spend is hugely beneficial for our bottom line. So that was, I think, the most measurable and immediate benefit that we wanted to get from Uniphore CDP.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. Consolidation, personalization, and ROI. Words to hear, sweet words for all the marketers. So from what I understand, right, Tom, your team had already invested heavily in a data warehouse, right? So what made the composable aspect of CDP, like Uniphore CDP, appealing for you?
Yeah, so composability for us was really a way to take advantage of all the time and effort that we had put into optimizing our data warehouse. We, in addition to implementing CDP, the other thing that I set out to do when I first started at LastPass was to fully refactor our data warehouse to turn it into essentially a customer 360 view, so that we had all of this connection between the different systems. Now, that was a really big effort. It took almost a year. But what it provided us was a single view of customers that could be utilized by essentially any system. Well, if you know anything about CDPs, that's something that CDPs often try to achieve for you by bringing the data into the system itself. In fact, some of the other vendors that we looked at did that, right? You would feed them their data and they had their own data model. We didn't need that. We had already built out our data model. We put a ton of time and effort into it, and we were very happy with how it had turned out. Now we just needed a way to activate that data and orchestrate the workflows around it and start deriving real value from it. So for us, composability made a lot of sense because, again, we'd already had that investment. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel on our data model. We just wanted to utilize what we'd already put together and start using it to drive increased ROI.
Awesome. I know, Tom, like we so far we talked about CDPs and composable and so on. So again, let me take a minute to talk about Uniphore CDP, how we approach composability, and what we mean by that, right? First, this is a big one. When we say a composable CDP, as Tom said, there's no data duplication or no data movement. We use something called a query pushdown, which means instead of moving or copying data ahead out of your warehouse, Uniphore runs the queries directly when the data is required and where the data already lives, like in Databricks. So marketers get real-time access to insights, and IT don't have to worry about the governance issues or managing yet another data store or yet another pipeline. Second thing, a composable CDP is warehouse or lakehouse agnostic. So whether you're using Databricks or any other data store, it just plugs right in. You don't need to restructure your stack or shift your architecture to fit bringing in a new vendor. Third, it's designated to be marketer friendly. And this is a big thing, right? We don't want marketers to be SQL experts or data engineering experts. If you are, great, but you don't have to be. It's fully no code with an intuitive interface that lets marketing teams build audiences, activate things, measure performance, and run campaigns, all without having to call in engineering every time or run weekly meetings. And finally, it's composable. This is the essence of it, right? So you're not locked into some giant monolithic platform. You can connect to the tools that you already use, keep what's working, and scale as you need to. I mean, this is the biggest thing, value point for IT teams as well, because that provides them investment protection for the tools that they've already bought and they like using. At the end of the day, Uniphore CDP gives you flexibility and speed, but with the governance and control that enterprise teams demand. Then, none of this works without a solid foundation underneath, right? So can you talk about the role Databricks played in helping LastPass unify and activate their data, and how Databricks' lakehouse architecture supports this kind of like modern composable approach?
Absolutely. So for those that aren't familiar, Databricks is a data and AI company. And ultimately what we do is we help companies collect, unify, organize all of their data so that they can essentially use it for BI, AI, and all the different use cases that are required. And ultimately how this intersects with the CDP is onto the next slide. Ultimately, this serves as the data foundation. We believe that the data foundation is ultimately the core, and this actually very much aligns with what Tom was saying about really building out that 360 view. Once you have that data foundation, you can then bring your favorite tools to the data instead of the other way around. And what we find is that this is extremely empowering for marketing teams to really get started more quickly with all the use cases that they need to tackle. And so now at this point, you might ask, why composable? And I think Tom kind of went into a good portion of why that is. If we go to the next slide, there's really a number of reasons why this is really the optimal way to go. First, optionality, right? So really making sure you're able to choose the right tool for the job. The second, we do see time and time again that this is a way to mitigate risk. You own your data. You're bringing those tools to the data. You reduce total cost of ownership. Really tackling the highest value use cases that you already have, and ultimately, all of this together helps you really truly accelerate innovation.
Yeah, and again, the composable CDP architecture means that you're not locked into a rigid all-in-one suite. I know I've mentioned this before, but this is the key part, right? Instead, you use the right tool for the right job. Say, for example, your Lakehouse for storage and governance, Uniphore CDP for audience building, activation, and whatever orchestration or analytics tools work best for you, everything works seamlessly. In addition to what Dan said, you get like some more control over your customer data, the lower TCU. The other part, the last part is the agility, right? You can plug in any new capabilities, test out new channels, or scale up, let's say, AI use cases without boxed into one vendor's entire end-to-end roadmap. And for teams like LastPass, right, that flexibility was huge. They wanted to consolidate workflows, reduce their customer acquisition cost, and personalize at scale. But of course, architecture is only one part of the story, right? Execution matters as much. Tom, I'd love to bring you back here and understand a few things. Can you walk us through like how you approach the proof of concept phase when you're exploring the CDP? What did that look like with Uniphore and Databricks? And how did you move from this initial testing to a full production deployment? Would love to understand the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. If we want to go ahead and move to the slide. So before we set out to start the proof of concept, which we did with actually two separate vendors, one of which was Uniphore at the time, Action IQ, we had a list of features that we knew we needed. We wanted to be able to activate across a wide variety of digital advertising platforms. We wanted to have clean integrations with preferably native connections with all of our martech stack. And then we wanted to understand how we could facilitate front-end tagging and start to enrich data upon prospect entry to the website, all things that we really struggled with. So, that was really our evaluation criteria that we set out with. For the POC, we worked very closely with Uniphore's professional services. I have to say that it was not a small part of the buying decision for us how good the service was during the POC. Uniphore gave us a ton of time. We never had to wait too long to get questions answered. The engineering investment that they made in us was really spectacular. I can't say enough good things about the sales team I work with. So it was actually one of the best vendor experiences that I've had. Certainly with something as in-depth as the proof of concept. And we were able to verify very quickly that we could connect to Databricks, that data sharing back and forth was very simple and easy. We were able to activate on all the platforms that we wanted to, Meta, LinkedIn, Google, et cetera. We were able to build some simple workflows to understand what the capability of the tool was. And, it met all of our needs there. And probably the best thing was that the way that we structured our proof of concept, it was a real instance, right? It was not like a little toy sandbox thing that we were going to have to remake when we went to implementation. The entirety of the POC, we knew that if we did choose to go with Uniphore, we would be able to roll the instance we had already configured directly into pilot, which ended up happening and really decreased our time to value. Our initial use cases were all around activating audiences on digital platforms, especially around suppression. The big issue for us is that we see a fairly high rate of folks clicking through our ads directly to login, meaning they're already customers. Well, that's obviously just wasted spend, right? So we don't want to market to those people. So just the suppression use case alone has proven extremely valuable for us, which we'll get into. But we were able to do that within, I think, like 3-4 weeks of kicking off the implementation, because and that was honestly as much as anything else on our side to configure audiences. So the whole experience of the POC into pilot, the time to value, it was all really, really high quality, and I was extremely happy with the experience. And from a roadmap perspective, like the use cases are just piling up, and we'll talk about that more a little as we go on. But I think that I made a reference earlier to using Uniphore as kind of the orchestration hub for all of our customer outreach. That is our vision. It's one we're moving towards, and it's really giving us unprecedented control over how often we talk to customers, what the messaging looks like, how personalized it is. These are things that would simply be unavailable to us without the CDP.
Thank you, Tom. So evaluation as in start with the right criteria, make sure you have the right partners to rely on, have the clear use cases that you want to explore, especially in your case suppression, test it out. I think that's a great playbook for potential people who are listening in to follow in exploring their use case and so on. So as we move to the next part, right, I know you went through this journey, you deployed Uniphore CDP on Databricks. What kind of results did you start seeing? I mean, as I understand, it has been a while, like 2 months, 3 months since it went live. Curious to hear what kind of results you saw.
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide then. So we saw an almost immediate drop in customer acquisition cost. Now, a lot of this was from the suppression use case that I described. And I should say this is strictly across digital advertising. But we did see that our click-through rate to conversion, which for us is somebody starting a trial, went up significantly. Again, a lot of that is because we weren't targeting our own customers, and we had the ability to be much more bespoke in terms of the audiences we were creating and marketing to. So, that alone made the whole project net positive from an ROI standpoint. Some of the workflows that we started to roll out, specifically one around cart abandonment, which is a big issue for us, being able to retarget those folks, that's starting to show significant revenue impact as well. And then I already mentioned that we're just seeing so much less customer login through ads. That suppression use case is really huge. And that's, this is within the first few months of having it rolled out. So I really can't wait to see what the results are as, we continue to pile up our use cases and deploy more functionality.
All right. Dan, and for you, right? Like, what stood out to you from this on the collaboration between LastPass, Databricks, and Uniphore during the rollout? And I'm generally curious too. I want the folks who are listening to understand, like, what role does the data platform or lakehouse like Databricks play in making these kinds of results become real?
Sure. I think, if we kind of go back to what some of what Todd said before, a lot of the sort of composable or warehouse or lakehouse native approach is you already have your data, you already kind of managed it, you already invested quite significantly. Again, let's bring the tools to your data and help you move quicker. And then, of course, having the data structure, having the governance, and having the ability to handle any type of data really ensures that you can get the results that you need.
And Tom, back to you. So now that you have the foundation in place, what are you excited to explore next? And I have a follow-on too. In addition to going through your what's next part, what advice would you give to marketing or data leaders listening in who are trying to modernize their engagement stack? Curious to hear both your perspectives.
Yeah, sure. Next slide, please. So at this point, we've achieved some of the early promise of the CDP, being able to use it for these various use cases within marketing, within product, within CX. I think that the next step for us is really around getting tighter with coordinating that customer journey throughout the life stages of a customer with us, being able to see how they're using the product, our product, LastPass, and being able to drive personalization based upon that product usage. So that's something we're actually actively working on now, building out. So come and talk to me in 6 months and I can tell you how it went. But very, very excited about possibilities there. Being able to enrich prospects in real time, this is really huge for us. When somebody comes in through our website and knocks on our door, can we figure out who they are right away? And that's something that Uniphore is helping us do via their profile API functionality. Because look, if we can identify up front that this person is either a consumer user or a business user, and especially if we can learn something about their title, working with the various data vendors, DMPs, that's going to allow us to personalize their journey and hopefully see a much higher conversion rate. And then finally, anonymous retargeting. We take privacy extremely seriously for obvious reasons, given our nature as a company, and we are also active in Europe. So we worry quite a bit about GDPR and other privacy-related regulations, as I think we all do. One of the things that Uniphore gives us is the ability to anonymously retarget without any knowledge on our side of who's coming to our site, right? So somebody comes in, we don't necessarily know who they are, but that doesn't mean we can't then go and retarget them through one of the digital ad platforms that we're now tightly integrated with. So these are all really important use cases for us to drive continued ROI and to improve customer experience via the Uniphore CDP.
And the part on what advice would you give to marketing and data leaders?
So from a marketing standpoint, I think that if you're going to do a CDP, be very clear on where you're hoping to get value, Be very laser focused on a small number of use cases that are going to provide the most ROI. Don't peanut butter yourself and spread too thin. Yeah, it's very exciting when you get a platform in like this that has a huge wealth of capabilities, all of which you want to try at once. Don't do that. Be focused. And I think from a data leadership perspective, the composable CDP is really powerful because it does let you activate your data, but you have to ask yourself as a data leader if you are at a place where your data is good enough for that. Are you going to be putting normal gas in a Ferrari that only takes premium, right? No, like you need to make sure that you're in a good spot and that you're making the necessary investments to have a strong view of your customer across your systems, because that's how you're going to derive the most value from a platform like Uniphore.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Dan, any last thoughts and advice on the same thing? What would you say to the marketing and data leaders in this webinar listening in, some advice to get most value out of Databricks and any CDP?
Yep. So, I think fundamentally, start where you are. The data foundation is definitely critical to success. At the same time, there's always different use cases that you can start getting started on. And I think one of the kind of wonderful things behind a composable pattern is that you truly can start where you are, right? You're already managing your data. You could always add in more data. You can always start kind of building things out, tackling things differently. So fundamentally, you can always start where you are and really start changing the way you're operating.
Awesome. Thank you both, Tom and Dan. Now is the time for the audience Q&A. Emmy, I understand we have some interesting questions. Would love to dive into them. Back to you.
Yes, Tom, Dan, and Callion, thank you so much for such insightful content. It was really interesting to hear, Tom, how choosing a CDP and looking into that process was one of the first things you were asked to do in your new role. And because marketing is such an expensive line item, being able to optimize even the difference between the head of IT and how they would approach your company compared to a consumer, and just kind of making all of these changes that really end up mattering at the end of the day. So we have quite a few questions from the audience. So for Dan, what's one common misconception you hear about composable martech or data activation?
Sure. So I think, there's definitely a lot of conversation within the market around package CDPs, or kind of the just more traditional CDPs versus composable CDPs. And, sometimes you hear about the cost element, the total cost of ownership, whether or not it's more or less through the composable pattern. And so I think there is sometimes a misconception that composable is actually more expensive, right? Because sometimes you're using, more than one tool. But what we really see time and time again is that it's actually the total cost of ownership goes down with composable CDPs. And you're also going back to some of the points we talked about earlier. You truly are kind of setting yourself up to accelerate innovation and reduce risk as well.
And a question for Tom, how does LastPass approach integrating its web, CRM, and behavioral data into a single cohesive system?
Typically what we're doing, I'll try to make my answer not too technical, but typically what we're doing is we're pulling data out of each of those systems, putting it into our Databricks warehouse, and then we're able to connect there at a customer level. So we understand what a customer is doing within our product, what they're doing within our website, et cetera. Those signals are used within the CDP for audience creation. Now, one thing I think I should mention, we're not only using the CDP for prospect marketing, we're also using it for customer experience and driving our outreach for existing customers. A big part of our revenue stream is upsell of existing customers. So, in many cases, we actually know quite a bit about these people. So unifying those data streams within Databricks, within our warehouse, and then utilizing the CDP to activate them. That's really what we're doing. And, I think I mentioned that we're trying to build out more workflows. One of the real benefits of the CDP is, when folks are coming in and logging in, those messages are going directly to the CDP and saying, okay, who is this? And hit branching workflows that say, yeah, this person, let's say, was a paid customer and now they have rolled into our freemium tier. What messaging are we going to surface to them through our CMS or through Pendo as a pop-out modal to try and get them to re-up their subscription, right? So that's really how we're utilizing CDP and those data sources to try and drive increased revenue.
And also for Tom, how has this transformation changed how your team collaborates cross-functionally?
So that's actually been one of the biggest things I think that we've seen from an organizational standpoint as a benefit is that, when you have these different groups, marketing, sales, customer experience, product, they own their own systems and it ends up being somewhat siloed. And we're not a huge company, so we have pretty good communication at a leadership level between various teams. But even so, it's hard to take everyone else's actions into account every time you make a decision. Well, one of the things that the CDP really facilitates for us is that it almost forces that organizational communication, because now you're building workflows that touch the customer across their journey. So now, CX has very clear insight into, okay, how has marketing been communicating with this individual? How has sales been communicating with this account, and how does that affect the way that we should communicate with them? So I think that it's actually really served to break down quite a few silos and to help unify communication around customer outreach across LastPass.
For organizations that have already adopted monolithic CDP solutions, are they out of luck adopting AI? Maybe Dan, if you want to start with that question.
So again, I would kind of bring it back to, really coming back down to the data foundation. I would say you're not out of luck if you've adopted a packaged CDP, or you have, as you call it, kind of monolithic CDP. You are kind of beholden within this kind of context itself. You are beholden to the capabilities of that specific offering. But you are by no means out of luck, and there's always opportunities to be able to tackle those use cases.
And if I may on that, Amy, we do have some larger enterprises, larger companies who have told us that they do have two customer data platforms for different use cases, right? Because big company, many business units, and so on. So yes, while you are beholden a little bit to the AI innovation that the package CDP might bring, the way to think about it is, let's say if there are new AI use cases that you can enable, there are definitely ways to bring in a composable CDP into the mix, see how that works, and see how that plays well. Because the nature of composable CDP is it works with other existing tech stack that you have. So see how that works along, and then get in the enterprise stack, if you will. That is a possibility. But again, it's a situation by situation thing. There is a way, but not the easiest.
We have a question for Tom. How do you measure success with these kinds of marketing data investments beyond just ROI?
Yeah, great question. Well, with the caveat that ROI is quite important. It is one of the things that we measured out the gate and have been happy to see a positive return on. I think that going back to my previous answer, actually, the breaking down of organizational communication silos and being able to have that 360-degree view of the customer and full control over how you're coordinating customer interaction, that's harder to measure the impact of, but it's really invaluable for an organization, because you eliminate things like, contact. Let's just say something simple like contacting a customer way too much. Now, that's very easy to do if CX is contacting them, if they're getting product notifications, if marketing is contacting them for upsells. Uniphore really allows us to eliminate that by having a central hub where we can see, like, yes, we've touched the customer through Marketo this way, and through Gainsight this way, and through our product directly in this way. It's like maybe chill out and don't email them 20 times this week. So, I think that those kind of customer experience soft benefits, they will reflect ultimately in the bottom line, but it's much harder to measure, I would say. But that doesn't make the benefits any less tangible or real.
I think this is a great question to end on. I'll have Kalyan start, if anyone else wants to add. But what's one trend you're watching closely as AI becomes more embedded in the marketing stack?
Oh, if I say AI agents, please don't roll your eyes, folks. But that is one of the biggest trends that we are seeing and we are actually adopting too. But in a more tangible way for marketers, right? What we're seeing is there is a shift from this static creation of segments like customer segments or rule-based workflows to real-time AI-powered decisioning flows, right? That's because that's easy. You had to have something manual where someone had to create, but that is where you can use marketing agents to leverage the power of LLMs and create that and continuously change based on any new inputs that come in, right? Because the one way we are thinking is marketers don't just want dashboards and insights. If they have agents that can act on those insights that come, that would be the sweet spot. For example, agents can measure any drop in, let's say, campaign performance, or automatically adjust targeting based on inputs coming in, or recommend a new offer based on evolving behavior. Because ultimately, everything is data, and the more data you feed to the large language models or the small language models that we build, the better it is in terms of the performance. And at Uniphore, again, just quick pitch, our marketing agents are built to do exactly that, right? They sit on top of your unified custom data inside your existing warehouse and continuously optimize this performance based on context, intent, and outcomes. I think that is important because the context and intent will come only from your specific data. Rest can be coming from the external metrics, external data, and so on. And the real trend isn't about Gen AI or a chatbot or an agentic copilot or any other buzzword. It's mainly how can you use AI to turn into business outcomes. So that's what we have set out to drive with the building of agents and such in the CDP space.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is, kind of the rise of what we at Databricks like to kind of refer to as the 10x marketer. So we're kind of entering this era where you're able to do more, you're really able to kind of take all the things that you love as a marketer and be able to do it that much more quickly and efficiently and effectiveness. And so it's very empowering from what we're kind of seeing.
Awesome. Well, Tom, Dan, and Kalyan, thank you again for joining me today and sharing this great content and answering all the questions from the audience. We really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. So don't miss eMarketer's next summit on September 9th in New York City, a live future-focused event where top marketers, brand leaders, and eMarketer analysts share the insights you need to navigate the next 5 years of marketing and advertising. Secure your spot, register for more webinars like this one, and subscribe to our newsletters, all at emarketer.com. eMarketer's podcast just got a glow up. New look, same great insights. Catch Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, and the Banking and Payments Show on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Keep an eye on your email for the link to today's playback. And of course, feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. Thank you all for your time, and thanks again to Tom, Dan, and Kalyan, the teams at Uniphore and Databricks, and the eMarketer Studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all at the next Tech Talk.